Hey, there we go. We're live. How's it going, Evan?
Doing good. You?
Busy. Trying to build the or change the way that people build digital products.
One day at a time.
So lots to talk about today. Theming seems to be a really big topic. I think that'd be an interesting one to jam on. But I think there's also this idea about like what we do about the future of like how we manage tokens that also kind of very much interrelates to that. I know that you were supposed to talk to Brad this morning, and obviously that didn't happen, but we're rescheduled for next week. But I wondered, like, those are the things I had. What did you want to talk about?
Yeah. I had like kind of a pre-chat with Brad like the other week when we were getting ready for all that kind of stuff. And one thing that he and I were agreeing on, and also when we had met some other people who are deep in this stuff recently, kind of one thing that everyone was like kind of agreeing on is that like the implementation of like theming, has been kind of like a solved problem for a while, right? Of all right, you've got this color primary and color secondary CSS var, and then based on a different CSS selector of whether it's like brand A or brand B, changing that like that var there. And so that idea of kind of like the contracts, right, is basically like in order to be like a theme, you must satisfy each color. You can't forget one. You can't like not declare color secondary, otherwise your UI won't work. So it's interesting because that's been a solved thing for a long time. That doesn't mean it's an easy thing. That doesn't mean that it's not bulletproof. But I think that the approach is pretty consistent. So that's nice.
So like when somebody's looking to think about that more practically, and they're saying like, how do I implement this solved problem of theming? Like, what's the approach?
Well, you pick out the list of variables you want, and try to make them semantic. So color primary is good, color blue is not good. So get all of those kind of set up, and then use that in all of your components, and then basically kind of for each theme set each of them basically. So I could dive more into like the code piece there, but I mean, code's great and all, but verbally talking through code is pretty painful.
A little bit challenging. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, Josh, how's it going? You got any questions for us? We're all about this AMA thing, and so like mostly it's been me asking Evan questions, but I would love to answer one of your questions.
It is going well. I'd say kind of a rainy day here, but whatever. And then
It's finally snowing. There's actually the ability to ski.
Yeah, my cousin's a leap year baby, and she's having her birthday tomorrow. So happy leap year, everybody, and happy birthday to my cousin, wherever she may be. No, she's definitely not on this podcast or on this stream. But to answer your question of how it's
my brother's technically first wedding anniversary tomorrow.
Oh yeah, because he did his wedding on February 29th. It's fun because like, yeah, every 4 years you get to like do like a super version.
Well, so back to it. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is some of the stuff around community, and in particular, like the community work that you and I used to be a fairly significant part of the Drupal community. Like maybe not the like the biggest players in the Drupal community by any means, but we spent a lot of time talking to conferences, giving presentations, running meetup groups, stuff like that. And I think that there's a lot of exciting things that we're trying to do in design systems that sort of mirror a lot of that community building work that was there, right? One of the things I valued most about the Drupal community wasn't necessarily anything about the software itself. It was about the friends we made along the way. And we joke about that line, but it is real, and that I loved the people that I worked with there on a regular basis. And so we just got off of a trip to New York where we spent a lot of time with leaders in design and engineering at a summit about design systems. It's all about like, how do we take people that typically are the strategic decision makers inside of their organizations and get them to actually like really care about design systems. We're likewise pairing that with an event that we're doing in Seattle tomorrow that is all about building this at like a ground floor level. So who are the people that are working in design systems every day, and what are the things that they need and want to talk about? And so, I see this community as being a really important aspect of how we continue to galvanize momentum and interest and adoption of design systems well beyond just one single company. And I'm really also like stoked to work with you on it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Josh, I'm seeing there you got thoughts on tracking what is useful for business versus vanity slash unhelpful metrics with design systems. Um, yeah, and I'm going to drop in a link here about this product I'd seen, Omelet. And so, oh, actually, it says that I couldn't post the comment. I'm not sure what's on there, but anyway, it's omelet.dev, omelet.dev. And they basically have got some component analytics and insights. Um, and so that's pretty interesting. I bet you we'll start to see like more things in that space. Right. Because if you can prove out that that the design system has got a good return on investment, then you're going to be able to justify the investment in that design system. And so I think adoption, right, is going to be like a really good metric right there. Like, are people using it? I think that you know some unhelpful metrics might be like number of components. I think we were talking to somebody the other week who were trying to get less components. And I think they had like 125. So they were like, okay, basically we want to like bring that down, because design systems are all about like having creativity within the constraints, right? You got your design tokens, which let you know your spacing scale as opposed to picking any number. And so, yeah, I wouldn't think that like number of components would be a super helpful metric. Well, might be another interesting one would be like complexity. So, like, if your components have how many props and variations do they have? Because that could just make it really hard to use, you know? So, yeah, I think that would be another good one there. And I think we had heard at the Patterns conference somebody talk about how they did a custom
Blast
in-house.
radius.
Yeah, this one blew my mind. They could calculate how long it would take to build like your own like drop down menu by hand, and then just say, hey, if you're using the component, you're saving that many hours. And I had no idea how they figured out that, but I mean, if you basically could say like, you use our drop down menu, save 73 human hours, like multiply times salary, like bam, there you
Right.
go. It'd be great.
No, and Josh, like kind of per your point, right? The idea about like, how do you balance stuff that is out there in the world versus like what is included in your design system? And at Knapsack, we've taken a fairly strong stance that like we don't necessarily provide those tools, but we provide really easy ways to hook into those tools that don't affect runtime. And so like one of the really difficult aspects of measuring impact in a design system is like, things matter most when they're in front of actual users. And when you have a bunch of measurement tools that are in front of actual users that are just related to the design system, it's oftentimes difficult to justify that like runtime overhead or cost to it. And so a big part of what we're trying to do is say, like, what can we understand within the design system, or what things can we insert into the design system that easily show up in the tracking tools you already have. And by the way, with the omelet thing, they're actually giving a talk at the Seattle meetup tomorrow. So if you're in the Seattle area and you want to check it out, it's worth a swing by.
Yep. And then there's some traditional kind of like metrics, like the DORA metrics, DORA, that I think would be generally good. And so, it's like, for example, from the moment someone starts working on something until it basically is like shipped to production, how long is that? And so basically somebody wants to start adding like, a new variant to the button. How long does it take them to start on that and then ship it? How often like are releases out? Because basically if people are asking for new functionality in the design system, or they report a bug and it takes forever to get out, they're probably just going to, ignore it. But if basically you can say, hey, there's like a bug in this, and then it's fixed later that day, you're going to just become like a huge evangelist. Now, might not always be able to fix it later that day. And so, and I believe the other ones are how often a bug makes it to production, and then how quickly you can resolve that bug. Because it's not about not making mistakes. It's about being able to like fix those mistakes quickly, and frequent small changes tend to have less bugs. They're easier to roll back, and they're easier for like PR reviews to happen. So those are a lot of the metrics that I think are pretty good. And you'll also note in metrics in general, you want to have kind of like a counterbalance metric. So for example, like I just mentioned, that you want to be releasing very often, but there's also a metric for how often a bug made it to production, right? And so in general with metrics, that's a really good idea. You could think about a classic one where they're like, we want user signups. And if you focus on that, but then everybody just doesn't like your product and they never show back up, then it's not good to just get a bunch of user signups. So you want to have a counterbalance metric of like how often they come back or things like that. So I would say all metrics, think about a counterbalance one as well to like pair up with it.
What else you got, Evan?
Yeah, let's see here. Yeah, I don't know. Got some good questions here. Let's see here. And how much is gold from the analytics beyond that?
I think it kind of depends on like what the purpose is, right? So there's the idea about like you have metrics for understanding adoption, you have metrics for understanding like time saved or efficiency gained or whatever that core like business metric is. So like, are you building an ROI case? Are you trying to understand what to build next? Are you trying to inform priorities? There's lots of different things that you want from different types of metrics. I think that like it is really interesting. And I was just having a conversation about this, about how like product management for a design system is kind of a fascinating proxy for how we think about use and investment in a design system. So it's like a product manager for a design system. You're simultaneously selling the design system within your organization, managing the creation of it, and setting the priorities for where it goes. That requires three different skill sets that oftentimes require three different sets of numbers. And I think that that's really interesting, where, what do you build next? What is the thing that is most important to your users? Like trying to reach those very specific consumers of the design system, which are ultimately not the users of the applications, is a very different group of people to find data about than whether or not you're actually showing up in a production app.
I got another one. Is ask the people who use your design system on a scale of 1 to 10, how much would you recommend using this design system to your colleagues? What's the name of that? What's that metric?
Yeah, it's like net promoter for the design system.
There it is. Yep. Because it's an NPS just in general, basically like a well-regarded one, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I mean, love it or hate it, like it is really common as a barometer for how successful the thing is that you're building. Um,
Hmm.
and it is fascinating, right? Because the idea of a design system as a product, like whether or not you believe a design system is a product, and there's like a whole debate about that. The idea is like it's definitely in service of downstream products. Um, and those like ideas of, hey, how do I serve the products that ultimately serve users is like a level of abstraction that's somewhat difficult to understand how to measure and then also how to communicate that measure. So there's like a manage up, manage down here that is what do you say to your executives when you say like, is the design system successful? Because ultimately the executives don't care if like products are using the design system. They care like what shows up in front of users is user value. Um, so I don't know there's a lot to that. Like it's a really complex thing. And I'm excited to start to see tools coming out that are helping to tackle this problem.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, and if you were real serious about this, uh, and had enough of kind of a mandate, being able to like figure out if to be able to say, hey, these components convert at a higher rate. So being able to say like, I mean, you'd have to basically get in the apps that are using the design system. You'd have to establish a baseline of the existing ones. Um, and one could think about something as simple as like, all right, how often are the design system buttons clicked versus, uh, you know, a regular button? Or you could think about like, maybe forms or something like that. Like these are the forms that people got through. Maybe they like people abandon the old one because they have too many hard times finding errors, but the new one's got great inline errors, and so they don't abandon the form as much, or something like that. So I think if you could tie it to like the user conversion, that would be pretty powerful. But again, that's something to be tough to do just at the design system level. You'd have to get into like that implementation. Um,
Yeah, and I think that like look, this is happening, right? Like there is an AI enabled future where there's a bunch of invisible AI that's optimizing our design choices based on the constraints of our design systems. And so like in a not too far flung future, the idea about how we create digital applications is going to be like, all right, here's a Figma file, here's a design system. Go do that work by converting that Figma file into an app based on the design system, or even better, like just take the app that we have, iterate through the design system around design choices, and optimize it. And there's a lot of data that is still standing in the way of being able to do that. Um, I guess it's not the data that's standing in the way; it's our ability to gather that data in a structured, usable format that's standing in the way. But ultimately, like that's going to be solved relatively soon, and then you're going to have a bunch of things that are trying to optimize these experiences.
mhm.
I was reading Josh's comment, and we're doing the quant and qual with users, should draw the details like the blast radius insights. Yeah, yeah, and there's also a bunch of like qual measures that are arguably more important than things like adoption. That are kind of fascinating, right? Like you hire a bunch of designers, engineers, product folks, sometimes content people that all work within a design system. Do those people feel like their jobs are made better? Do they feel like they're happier, more fulfilled? If you were to take the design system away from them, like would they quit their job? Would they just really miss it? Like what would happen that ultimately represents like a real behavior change inside of an organization? Because I often cite my friend Morgan at SockGen as somebody that's living in the future, where like they haven't named their design system. They don't really think about it in terms of adoption numbers. They think about it less as a product and more as a way of working. And that idea of like when you have a way of working and you've embraced that way of working, people view that as like the way they do their job. Um, and I think that that's kind of like a different level than just like I use the design system to build stuff most of the time. It's like if I fundamentally believe that like my way of working is through these systems based concepts, that's a bit different than just saying I've adopted the design system.
Yeah, totally. So, right, you're basically going to get this sentiment that people are like, it's better.
Right. Right. I'm happier.
And I mean, yeah. And I mean, the thing is that like, okay, metrics, there's sentiment. That's fun. But honestly, if there's enough people that answer that, then it actually does become like statistically relevant and like persuasive, right? You know, um,
Yeah.
5 million of your employees love the crap out of it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like the idea of like how many GitHub stars does your project have, right? People don't have to star your thing to use it, but if they do, it means that they took the time to come out and like star your thing. I think that there is something there that is interesting because at a high enough level in most organizations, you can get a mandate, and that mandate is an interesting tool where you can kind of force the adoption, but you can't really force people to love it.
Yep.
Yeah. That episode with PJ turned out to be a real fun one. Especially like the talk about like, his time at Disney and everything. I think that it's an interesting idea around how do you get people not just to use the system, but actually love it and want to invest in it and want to put their time towards it. And how that is like a very hard job of of building a product or a community or a way of working, whatever you want to call it, that ultimately like best aligns to what people want in the organization. It's a great URL. Oh yeah, that's a great point. We are having a leadership summit in San Francisco. Kind of get back to our chat about community, April 18th. And so, if you're in the San Francisco area and you would like to come to a gathering of interesting folks spending time making decisions about design systems, you can apply. Head over to our event page and check it out. Anything else, Josh? You've been awesome on this. Thank you for coming. Well, sweet. I think the last thing that I had for you, Evan, is like, what are you most excited about in the next month with some of the work that we're doing in Knapsack and that we're building on?
I am probably the most excited about enabling designers to have their intent make it into production. And so what I mean by that is like working on theming and changing around some of like the theming values and then see, rendered components actually change. And then that being, in the medium it's destined for. So end users will ultimately get experience it and having just like that ability to actually kind of like play with it. So this goes far beyond like playing with like the props of like, this is a secondary large button to be able to be like, what does secondary look like? What does large look like? It needs to be a little larger, it needs to have a little bit better contrast and be able to actually like do that. So I think that'll be pretty exciting. Yep.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think it's exciting to see. We've always had like my favorite picture, right? Like the beautifully drawn horse that turns into a stick figure the further along your right, and like that continuum of the thing that you designed in Figma and then the thing that showed up in front of users being oftentimes very, very different, and how just the scale of management of getting something from a Figma file into production, it's a lot, and it's a lot because it's a lot of steps, it's a lot of translation, and it's ultimately a lot of organization management. And also referring back to the episode that PJ had, that I thought was a fascinating comment, was the idea that like the disciplines still work very differently, even though there's been more convergence between design and engineering than there has been a long time. There's this idea that if you're writing a line of code that line of code is almost always going to be edited before it ends up in production. It's going to go through linting rules. It's going to go through a code review. It's going to go through all of these different steps that are ultimately going to change or modify what that end product is from what, an engineer first typed into their keyboard. Designers don't really have that same idea of that workflow. I think that there are organizations that operate that way, but very often design is a little bit more precious. And the idea that like this thing that I've made is the right thing to make, and it should be immutable except by the person that originally created it. And that sort of immutable nature of design, I think that like that's what's like slowly becoming eroded by these systems, where the idea is like, no, design is a bunch of just like code, a bunch of mostly done things that we ultimately want to all touch and work on together. Awesome. Well, this has been great. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I appreciate you all showing up. Evan, great to talk as always, and looking forward to the next one.
Absolutely. Hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Take care, everybody.